Welcome to The Journey to Leadership, a shared knowledge podcast for those seeking leadership advice from those that have done it and are about to do it. Each week, this podcast spotlights a community champion from the public, private, or not-for-profit sector. We talk individual success, comebacks, and lessons learned. Today's journey profiles Emanuel Cleaver II, now in his 7th term representing Missouri's 5th Congressional District, which primarily consists of the inner ring of the Kansas City metropolitan area, including nearly all of Kansas City south of the Missouri River and stretching east to Marshall, Missouri. Before coming to Congress, he served 12 years on the City Council of Kansas City before becoming the city's first African-American mayor in 1991. Here's your host, Gary O'Bannon, Executive in Residence at the Bloch School.
Congressman Cleaver, welcome to The Journey.
Good to be with you.
I want to begin by asking you about the murder of George Floyd and its impact on the nation here in Kansas City.
Well, first of all, the reason it has impacted so many people is that it erased any of the notions that people have had over the years that all of these claims of police misconduct were false claims, and that African Americans just simply had a strained relationship with police, and anytime something happened violently, it was because they resisted arrest and so forth. The whole world watched George Floyd die. We saw him take his last breath. And I think that stung us in a way that none of the other murders have. And so we're seeing now in the United States, police departments going back now and releasing video of previous homicides. And I'm not using that term loosely. I'm using it, I think, concretely. And so we're now in a situation where not only are African Americans and Latinos concerned and upset and protesting, but I've spoken to rallies here in Kansas City down on the plaza where we had maybe 5,000 people, and 55 to 60% of them were white. And so I think young Americans whose skin color happens to be white are saying, this is not a black problem, this is a problem in America. And so they're involving themselves, and they are saying essentially, our parents blew it. Our parents messed it all up. And now we're going to fix it. We're going to involve ourselves. And many of them have come down and put their lives on the line. And the reason I say that is because all you have to do is watch the footage from around the country. And there have been citizens, black and white, who've been beaten or knocked down or pushed and wounded in some way or another. So this has been a rather dramatic moment for the world and the United States in particular. But hopefully all of this chaos will not be in vain.
You just mentioned how intimately involved you've been in some of the protests and rallies here in Kansas City, Missouri. How do you grade the local Kansas City, Missouri Police Department in their handling of these protests and rallies?
Well, I think with the exception of the tear gas or whatever the chemicals they used, I think it's been okay. I think we put police in an awkward situation in many instances that they're not equipped to handle. But unlike a lot of the cities, we haven't had beatings to occur where police used nightsticks to just beat people into a pulp, which we've all seen on television. So we haven't had that kind of an experience in Kansas City. Doesn't mean that we don't have some issues in Kansas City, but for whatever reason, our police have been a bit restrained, and the governor sent the National Guard in, but after one day, he did the smart thing, which was to take them out. And the protests have continued very peacefully, and I think in any time you do a massive protest in these days, you're going to have anarchists coming in. The FBI reports that these white supremacist groups are growing in numbers around the country, and many of them would love dearly and desperately to have a race war. And they've been in Kansas City to be sure. My son taped me speaking, and then he taped a guy wearing all black, and there were a number of them wearing all black in the crowd. He taped him the whole time I was speaking because my son was scared. The man had his hand in his pocket. You could see the outline of a gun. And the police said to us, look, we know they have guns, we know they're armed, but the Missouri General Assembly has approved legislation to make this a concealed and carry state. So there's nothing we can do about it unless they start shooting. Well, thank God they didn't. But when I look at the video that my son shot that night, it still sends chills through me to know this man is staring at me with his hand in his pocket on a gun.
Legislation aimed at curbing police violence was attempted in 2014 after that fatal shooting of unarmed teenager Michael Brown by a white officer in Ferguson. Are you hopeful that there will be a different outcome for national legislation? I know a lot of the municipalities are taking it upon themselves to make certain changes, but are you more hopeful this time around that maybe there will be a federal legislation?
I am more hopeful, but what Jeff Sessions stopped as the Attorney General was called Patterns and Practices of Discrimination, whereby the Justice Department would go into communities and examine the practices of those police departments and the patterns of discrimination. And then they would enter into a consent decree with that city, and which would say, by this date you're going to do this, and this date you're going to do that. Well, it fixed Ferguson, but Jeff Sessions threw it out. They no longer do it as of this discussion you and I had. We're trying to get it back. The Congressional Black Caucus is trying to get it back in legislation. Last week, Ferguson elected its first female mayor, who was also the first African American mayor, and the city council has changed. When we had the disruption in Ferguson, most people didn't know that was a town of 70% African Americans. They had police. They had 55 police officers. 50 of them were white and lived in most cases in other little communities around in the St. Louis suburbs.
Not representative at all.
Not representative at all. And they had one city council member in a city that was 70% black. And the patterns and practices studied by the Justice Department showed that the municipal government was being funded on traffic tickets. And so who got the traffic tickets? African Americans. And so they entered into a consent decree, and it has changed dramatically over that period. And Ferguson used to be a sundown town, what's called a sundown town, which is, we had a lot of it in the state I grew up in, where African Americans must be out of that city by sundown.
Only African Americans?
Only African Americans. And we had a number of them in Texas, you know, we had one town in Texas that had a sign up across the main street that said, you know, welcome to Winsburg, whatever it was. We have the blackest dirt and the whitest people. And that was only taken down in like the 1970s. And so Ferguson was one of those sundown towns in Missouri. So it's been transpired. Now we're trying to get some additional legislation approved, but it is very, very difficult because I think some would prefer to say that, you know, Michael Brown was a bad person and he stole a cigar or whatever out of a grocery store, and maybe that's all true, except that I didn't know that we gave capital punishment for stealing a cigar, and the other part of it is, you know, I was down there in Ferguson. They let Michael Brown's body lay out in the street in the hot sun in the middle of summer. You know, temperature just below 3 digits, just below 100, and that angered people. You know, it was enough for it to be shot and killed, but then it was almost like they used to do in the South. They would lynch someone and then allow his body to hang for 3 or 4 days as a message to others.
After the protests go away, the rallies go away. What happens after that, and what needs to happen in order to keep the momentum going?
Well, I get the feeling that this time they may not go away. I think they may ebb and flow. They may wane and come back, but I don't think they're going to go away, because the young people are so committed to this that I don't think they will allow it to go away. I think some of the older people will probably get tired. But I remind people that change has always been brought about by young people. You got old people, you and drinking Geritol and liniment and all that. But you got these young people who have fresh minds and strong bodies and energy. Alexander the Great, I think, was 24 when he conquered the world. Martin Luther King Jr. was 26 years old, the most powerful leader in the United States, 26 years old. So young people are going to bring the change about, and those of us who've been around for a while should listen to them and also provide counsel to them so they can avoid the mistakes that were made in the past that maybe reduce the level of achievement that we could have reached had we been a little more strategic and a little brighter. For example, in a crisis, words matter. So if you say defund the police, and then you say, well, we don't mean just shut the police down. Well, look, I speak English. You said defund the police. So we have to be very careful during this time with our language. I have two cousins. One of them was the head of the Black Panther Party in Kansas City, Pete O'Neill, who's now exiled in Arusha, Tanzania. And Eldridge Cleaver, who died, a couple of decades ago, but who was one of the top three movers and shakers in the Black Panther Party nationally. And I think they will. Pete will tell you that if you're going to challenge the system, you've got to be extremely organized and disciplined, and your language has to be concise, because you give those who are opposed to you a place to hang their hats. For example, people are now saying who are opposed to many of the things that the protesters want are saying, well, they're saying we need to shut down the police department. And so I think, but it's a mistake that I hope from which we can recover. But that was a mistake. We should have said we want a great deal of reform in police departments all over the country. But I admire these young people for going out and putting their lives on the line. Maybe not as dramatically as we did back in the day, but nonetheless, that it was not safe to participate in these marches as we have been able to see on television.
You mentioned the percentage of majority of Americans who are also marching. How critical is that to getting legislation ultimately approved?
It is extremely important. Let me tell you why. Back in the day, in the 1960s, 1950s, 60s, before my time, we had white participation, but it was primarily Catholic priests and rabbis and a few Jewish activists who got involved, but nothing like what we're seeing now. And the reason the whites got involved in the civil rights marches was because we knew that they would never open fire if you got the president of Notre Dame University locked arms with Martin Luther King, and that actually happened. And so we knew that they would start shooting if you have all of these, religious leaders, because shooting us is not a big deal, but you shoot, one of these priests, and the world is going to come in on you, or kill a rabbi. So that was the extent we had back then. There were scatterings of people who marched, but now you've got, it's it's emotional. When I stood up to speak to those kids, I told them I had never seen a crowd like this. And my first march I led, I was 15 years old. It's the first time in my life I've ever seen a crowd like that, and it was moving, and it was also inspiring, and for me, because I thought this is different. This is not like what we've seen before, and I'm still excited and enthusiastic about what I'm seeing.
Switching back local real quick. Mayor Quinton Lucas, I think for the most part, has gotten high marks on how he has handled this. What would you do different?
I don't know if I would do anything dramatically different than what the mayor's already doing. I do think that it might be of some value to have an ongoing dialogue with African American clergy. It's time consuming, but if we had a white or pink or green mayor, and he or she came to me and said, "Hey, what do you think I ought to do?" I'd say, "You got to have a relationship with these clergy," and the reason is that on Sunday morning they talk to more people collectively than you're going to talk to in 6 months, and people will listen to them. So I think he's done well. He's listened to the demands about the police chief, and I think you have to listen to those demands, but you have to measure your response by logic and some emotion, but logic, emotions, and what would that do to the overall tone of the city if you fired the police chief in the middle of a crisis. I don't know the police chief deeply. I know him. I've had a couple of meetings with him, so I'm not getting into the whether he should be fired or not. What I would say is that it's not the optimum time to fire the police chief when you're in the middle of a crisis. But I'm not there anymore, so I'm watching at a distance. And I was fortunate. I used to meet with Dick Berkeley, Charlie Wheeler, Ike Davis. All three were alive when I was mayor. And man, that was a blessing for me because I could go and talk with them and get advice that I could not learn, not in a book, not from anybody else except those three men.
Now, you were mayor from 1991 to 1999, and you had a seat on the police board of commissioners, 1 vote. We are now still the only city that does not have local control of its police force. St. Louis solved their issues some years back with the help of a billionaire that got a statewide ballot. Mm-hmm. What needs to happen, minus some billionaire coming in and repeating what they did in St. Louis, to make local control happen?
Well, first of all, I hope people understand the reason we don't have local control goes back to the days of the mob when there was a fear that the mob ran the police department, and frankly, in some cases they did. But those days are gone, and so we might need to re-examine the relationship between the police and the state and or the city. What I will say, and what I've said to some of the people who come to me with that question, local control, that's good as far as I'm concerned. I'm not going to get a headache over it. But keep in mind that local control versus city control would not have saved the life of Mr. George Floyd. And that would not have saved his life if they had local control. And they had local control.
Well, but you would have more control over the force, because I would assume right now, if the city manager in Kansas City calls the police chief and the governor calls, I mean, you might take the governor's call anyway, but you're certainly not going to take the city manager's call when
that's right.
You're obviously not running.
That's right. I think the policies must be designed locally. Now, I actually am the only mayor who ever served as the president of the police board. I did it for a short period of time, I think 3 or 4 months, waiting on the governor, Governor Carnahan, to make an appointment. But I actually served as the president of the police board. And I think we can have local control, but there's got to be limits. If you talk to some of the police officers and they'll tell you why they oppose it, I can tell you that some of it is legitimate, but we can work it out. For example, they are afraid that if it's locally controlled, that people who are wealthy and people who are politically connected could get breaks with the police. In other words, they could say, you know, the chief, you were appointed by the mayor, and I'm a big supporter of the mayor. My cousin just robbed 7-Eleven. I want you to let him go. Now, I think that I mean, that's the argument I've heard over the years. I think that can be fixed easily, you know, by having a civilian board looking at any actions on the part of the police that would raise some level of suspicion about someone who was allegedly committing a crime.
Is that a rampant claim for all other cities and states that have local control?
No, I don't think so. But that's I mean, having served as mayor and had police security around me all the time, and we've spoken candidly about all kinds of issues as it relates to police. Sure. And that's one of the things you'll hear from some of the officers. And you know, I'm sure that has passed down through the years to them. But I do think that there needs to be reform with every police department in the country, in the United States, and I don't think that's a radical position. I think it's real, and people want to believe that the people who were called to serve them are not people who believe they were called to hurt them. And you know, when I was mayor, we started a program called PEN, Police in Neighborhoods. And so if a police officer wanted to live inside the city of Kansas City, the urban core, we gave him or her a house with a dramatically reduced price. But we wanted the police to live there, wanted to park his car you know, in the driveway so that people would know that he or she lived there. And we got a lot of police officers moving into Kansas City. Sometime after I left the office, that program was discontinued. But I thought that was a valuable program because the police living right there in the neighborhood gave people a lot of comfort, and they got a chance to know this is a human being, just like me. And they would move into these homes and create a relationship with the neighborhood organization. But you know, things change, and maybe it was time to try to do something in another way. And I'm never somebody to say the way I did it was right, and we're not going to change.
And one more question on this before we move on to our next topic, which I want to talk a little bit about COVID-19 and its impact. But are we setting ourselves up for just a repeat of what we're experiencing right now, maybe 3, 5, 7 years, 10 years down the line, whenever it might be? If you don't have federal legislation that governs all the police forces, as opposed to allowing all the different communities to tweak or overhaul, you're still going to have issues if the system doesn't appear to come from the federal level, where it mandates that all law enforcement follow the same rules. You know, no chokeholds and no whatever, because if other areas are still allowed to do it, well, aren't we just going to see a repeat of this, even if it's just in pockets?
Yes. And the Congressional Black Caucus, we just introduced a package of legislation, and included in that package is a legislation that would create a national standard for police officers. Now, this doesn't in any way eliminate local control, or that the local government can't have their own standards, but you know, these are up here, and you can do anything you want underneath those things. And we have a leverage because almost every police department in the country receives money in some form from the federal government. And we could easily say, you know, you don't even have to do the federal standards. However, if you want federal funding, the first question has to be whether or not your department has conformed to the national standards. If not,
well, but let me tell you something, Congressman. If they're turning down federal money and they don't want to implement those reforms, those are the ones you better be watching.
Absolutely. But I don't think there's a police department in the country that would turn down a burn grant from the Department of Justice. And so I think we have a lot of leverage right there. We've introduced that legislation yesterday. So
what's going to happen when it gets to the House generally supports things like that, right? But what's going to happen when it gets to the Senate, which is still controlled by the Republicans, who don't appear to be fully on board at this point?
Yeah, that is my fear. That's why last night, my wife and I have been talking about this. I have difficulties sometimes sleeping because our mind is running and I can't, get it shut off. And then one of the things has been that my fear that the House will pass this legislation, for very progressive legislation, and then Mitch McConnell will say something like it's dead on arrival, or we're not even going to take up the bill. And my fear is that could create another tumult, where people are angry again. And I'm already concerned about, the conflict getting spiraling out of control. And I think that would be very dangerous. But I don't think we should say, well, we probably shouldn't try to introduce it because Mitch McConnell may not allow it to move in the Senate. I think we have to introduce it and do what we think is right. And then Mitch McConnell is going to have to live with his decisions.
Well, and it has to be transparent for everybody to see.
Absolutely. And I can assure you it will be.
COVID-19 has devastated businesses and individuals' pocketbooks. Are you hopeful that there will be more stimulant packages coming when the other one expires July 31st, I believe?
Yes, we're almost at the end of what we call the CARES Act, but we have in the House passed what we call the HEROES Act. And the HEROES Act was an attempt by Congress to continue what we believe to be desperately needed assistance to states, local governments, and individuals who lost their jobs. And so they can get unemployment benefits, and then they can get enhanced unemployment benefits, $600 a month. Mm-hmm. And we would get insurance and assistance for small and minority businesses who've been left out so far. Unfortunately, Senator McConnell has already said that is dead on arrival. And look, we've got 110,000 plus Americans who have died as of this discussion you and I have had from this novel virus called corona. And we have and GDP right now at barely 1%, and we have unemployment at levels that we've not had since the Depression, and then we have had 30 million Americans who file for unemployment benefits. So we're in trouble, and it hasn't stopped. And so, there are those in Congress who are ready to say, well, look, people need to be on their own, and we don't need to expend any more money. And it's easy to say if you're a wealthy person. What I hope the American public understands is that we have a lot of millionaires. I mean, a lot of millionaires in Congress. Now, I'm not mad just because I'm ranked second from the bottom.
Well, you used to be last.
Yes, 435. One of my buddies replaced me, Alcee Hastings, Congressman from Florida. He and I have broken up a great relationship because he replaced me as the lowest person in terms of wealth out of 535 members of Congress. And so sometimes these members don't understand if they're worth $60 million or $120 million, they don't understand that $600 a week enhanced unemployment benefits can save a family.
Absolutely.
They don't understand it. So some of us are going to push and push and push. My fear is that if we don't do it, the economy is going to slip deeper and deeper into the depths of depression-like situations, and it's going to be infinitely more difficult for us to somehow arise out of this situation economically. People are already saying, it's going to end in 3 months and it's going to be glory, hallelujah, okay.
But not health officials.
And no, because the coronavirus has not gone away. There are major companies all over the world working toward a vaccine, but the latest polling shows that a significant number of Americans are saying they're not going to take the shot. And one of the reasons they're not is they think that because we're hurrying the scientists to come up with something, that the testing won't be sufficient because of the political desire to get some kind of a vaccine on the streets. And so until people feel comfortable, that vaccine is not going to mean anything.
And who can blame them for being concerned? Because the health officials will say the same thing.
Absolutely. If you talk to the CDC or if you talk to the National Institute of Health or any of the scientific communities around, they will tell you that the coronavirus is going to come back, with a level of fury that we may never have seen before. And just look at where we are. Okay, coronavirus, 110,000 people. We got unemployment at a high level. Most people don't have their jobs anymore. Then we have the heat of summer coming on, and we just entered into hurricane season. We have youth unemployment at the highest level it's been probably in the last 100 years. And people can understand that something is wrong. Something is dramatically and dangerously wrong, and they're going to want a response from the federal government. And right now, the federal government, through at least with Mitch McConnell, is saying, I think we've helped enough. I don't understand it. Maybe because I've been poor all my life, but all I know is that if we don't address this problem, I think we're going to see the threads of our flagship democracy beginning to tear.
Now, my last question is an open question to you. You represent thousands of people in your congressional district, but you're also influential to thousands more that you don't. What message do you have in a closing thought?
Well, these are some very difficult times. We're in a crisis moment in the United States, but these crisis moments also offer us an opportunity to proceed or recede. And I think that there are the majority of us who would like to proceed and take advantage of this opportunity. When we go through any crisis, we ought to look for the blessing. There is a blessing in there. There is an opportunity in there. If we would open our eyes and celebrate the existence of other human beings of like mind, we can make some dramatic changes. This should not be the end. This ought to be a new beginning.
Congressman Cleaver, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for giving us a little bit of your time. On behalf of my mentor and longtime friend and someone you know well, Chuck Moore told me to tell you hello, so I want to be sure to do that.
That is a longtime friend. Thank you very much. Good to do this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you as much.
Journey to Leadership is supported by the UMKC Bloch School of Management. We would like to thank Bloch School Dean Brian Klaus, Associate Dean Brian Anderson, Program Chair Jeff Hornsby, Producer Editor Damon Smith, and KC Street Notes. The comments and opinions expressed on the show, either by the guest or host, are not intended to reflect those of UMKC, the Bloch School, the University of Missouri System, or any of its officials. Until next time, enjoy your journey.